So we've been told to walk on water and stand on mountains. And we can and we will. And we'll even do a group sermon today because the preacher is disabled. My mother died yesterday morning, and she was 94, and her name is Eleanor Clara, and she died in her sleep, and she was ready. And I don't want to talk about that now, but I do want to talk about that these surprises come to us, and we're never ready for them. We never can be ready for them. And Warren and I are also having our 5th grandchild any second. So that's how it goes, right? Life and death, beginning and ending. And the truth of the matter is I had about 2/3 of a sermon written, and it didn't make any sense to me when I read it. And I have a hard enough time putting one thought after another in general. And I knew we were going to have a circle today, so I thought I'd give you a few bullets and we would talk about the intended topic, which was the right to repair. So let's try it. We've done this before, and you all are pretty good at it. The only thing we do that doesn't quite work is if one person decides to take over the sermon, at which point I'll have to give you what I have here, and that won't work. So if you want to speak, please speak once, and if you need to speak again, speak by looking around the room to make sure there's no one else who wants to say something. And we're going to have some special music today, too, of a circle. So when that circling music comes, think of that as the form of today's message to you. So the text you just heard from Isaiah 58:12, and that's what a sermon is. It's just a reflection on a text, on a scripture, says that we will be repairers of the breach, restorers of streets to dwell in. And my first point is that the right to repair is a funny thing. You may be hearing this in environmental circles, that we should let our cell phones go as long as we possibly can and repair and repair and repair them, so that we not add to the mining of precious magnesiums and other things. It's a really good idea, but I'm so upset by the language of the right to repair. Is it a right to repair? Is that language overdone by those of us who are progressive Christians in the first place? I certainly don't want to join Verizon and Apple in having more than one cell phone every couple of years. That makes sense. I don't want to have to replace my refrigerator because you can't find the parts, or the stove, or the air conditioner. God knows I want to repair that lift for which we cannot find the parts. We have a right to repair. And yet, is that what this scripture is about? Doesn't it instead call us to do something rather than make us do something? Doesn't it ask us to do something that we may do instead of telling us what we must do? Isn't the punishmentalist religious right always telling us how to be bad? You must not replace your cell phone. You have a right to repair your cell phone. Isn't it always wagging its fingers at us? Is there another verb here? What about a welcome to the role of the fix-it? You and I were not created to be the handyman for the universe. We were not created to be fixing everything all the time. We were created to be raised up, to walk on water, to do things by invitation. What do you think? What do you think? Micah, what do you think?
I agree. I read this as basically a title to live into, a title that it would be too easy to deny. I feel like the writer of Isaiah, who we don't totally know who that was, there might have been 3 different ones, there might have been 300 different ones. I feel like whoever's writing this passage is giving us a promise that if we will fulfill what God is calling us to do on the earth, that we can earn this title, we can earn that right to repair. I think that these words repair and restore are also, I'm not an etymologist, so I don't totally know the difference between the 2 words, but repair seems very mechanical and utilitarian, and restore actually seems to call on my soul to do something. It seems to call me to do something more than simply take my tools and go to work and fix. It calls me to continue to live something after I do that fixing.
Mm-hmm. Good.
So something that's implied by the text, or perhaps even stated, is that we will be allowed to repair and restore. And one of the arguments about the right to repair issue is that for certain things, John Deere tractors are frequently mentioned in this respect. Individuals cannot gain the knowledge or actual access to the equipment to repair their own things. They are not, it's that they are denied even the opportunity to repair. And so you could argue it's not the right to repair, it's the right to have the chance to repair. It's the right to be able to repair that which is broken.
It's really beautiful permission giving. Anybody else? Yeah, Bill.
When I think of repair, I think of injuries to our bodies, which leave scars and can never really be repaired because there's always that scar there. But restore goes back to a scarless state. And I think of Isaiah and I think of rebuilding Jerusalem, but not sort of doing both, rebuilding the old Jerusalem, but building a new Jerusalem simultaneously.
Well, that's going to give me the entry to my next point. So many of you know that this was a big week for people who believe in the right to choose an abortion. Very, very big week here in New York, here in Washington. And even if you buy the argument that a woman who has a life inside her that she didn't choose, she missed her birth control, she is a slut, the favorite argument of the right. She's always having sex because she just can't help herself. Even if you buy that the woman who got pregnant in an unplanned parenthood way, which I don't, accidents actually happen, incest happens, rape happens, young girls sometimes drink too much and are not completely in charge of ourselves. Even if you buy those arguments, does a person not have a right to repair their mistake medically? Nadia Bolz-Weber, who is a really interesting Lutheran pastor, gave the keynote at the Planned Parenthood event I attended in Washington. And she talked about being 24. She's really an interesting Lutheran pastor because she looks like a biker and she's got great tattoos, just great tattoos. And she's signaling the kind of community that she wants to be involved with. But when she speaks, she sounds just like a regular Lutheran pastor. So it's really a kind of, She said, look, I had my first abortion when I was 24. I was 2 years sober and clean. And yes, I did get pregnant by the pizza delivery man. And she said, I shouldn't have done that. I wish I hadn't done that. And I can't believe I got pregnant by that. And she said, I liked him just fine. We ended up dating for 12 years. But I was too young to have a child. When we talk about the right to choose something as precious as a medical intervention on life, when we choose to do that, don't we have a right to do that? Is it not right to choose for life? For life. Not for children who aren't wanted. That is not life. What do y'all think? I know it's a hot topic. I don't want the room exploding. I mean, it can if it wants to.
Just, so, it's always so scary. It's really loud. When it says your people will rebuild the ancient ruins, it's interesting because without getting all the way to restorer of streets and dwellings, it almost looks for a second like it's echoing things like Make America Great Again and things like that, where it's, well, who gets to choose what ancient looked like? What does that mean? And who gets to have that opinion? And who gets to decide? And so the fact that it moves into streets and dwellings, that it is about creating homes, that it is about creating space for community passage between these things. And the idea that with a lot of what's happening now, as you were saying, is without giving ourselves permission to decide that we were making the wrong choices and to move forward, that there is always, unfortunately, destruction as part of rebuilding. That you have to dig up old foundations to build new ones so that things are more inclusive and better for everyone.
Thank you. Anybody else? That's a really interesting comment. There is a kind of progress implied, right?
And I think kind of going off of that, that there's kind of a cultural terrible mandate to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and that can only exist with like a correlative right to repair, a right to exist without systematic impediments to your growth, systematic impediments to grow from your mistakes, which is kind of a secular word for sins. Yeah, so I think there is a right to repair if we subscribe to this weird notion of you've got to pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Yeah.
Where's the grace in being fixed?
Of the 100 candidates running for president, I think it was Mayor Pete, but I could have this wrong. He was talking about how infrastructure is actually taking care of those of the poorest among us, because if your car breaks down, and you don't have the resources to fix it because the roads put everything out of whack, that places a special burden on the poor. And one of the things that happened with the Clergy Consultation 50th anniversary is that we really went deeper into the reproductive justice aspect of abortion. And we've been shamed by these decades where we have had an unjust system, because clearly God's option is for the poor, and the burden of abortions is on the people without resources. And that has been true since the Hyde Amendment, and we're seeing it in the poorer parts of our country right now, where the burden is on women. And I think that what we're seeing is that our infrastructure under Roe v. Wade was not as strong as we'd hoped, and so it has to be changed. And I'm a little bit enamored of the idea of mandatory vasectomies. I understand that's not going anywhere, but on the other hand, it is reversible, it is relatively painless, and men might understand what it means to be what Howard used to refer to as mandatory motherhood imposed on them.
Amen? Yes. All right. Right. Please.
My condolences, Donna. I just wanted to say that. And speaking of mothers, not being one myself, I showed up at Foley Square last week at noon for the noon protest that was going to happen. And I got there and rode my bike down, and there were news trucks and barricades. And I said, "Where are all the protesters?" And then I was informed that it had been rescheduled for 6 o'clock that evening. And I burst into tears, and I called a woman. I'm of an age, I was raised by 70s era feminists. That's where I come from. And that's why I showed up at Foley Square. And back in the day, there was this term called zero population growth. It's horribly out of fashion right now, but can I just say that looking at this great big zero in front of me right now is helping immensely. Thanks.
All right. Sam?
So the discussion is bringing me back to this Isaiah text, and each line, I've been thinking about the prophetic imperative of the text and what is being prophesied and for whom, and looking at line by line, your people will rebuild the ancient ruins and will raise up the age-old foundations, repairer of broken walls, restorer of streets with dwellings. And the agency and the self-determination is not in the repairer or the restorer or the raising up. It's in the person or the community or the thing that is getting healed and getting served. And when I think of women's bodies today and women's rights, it's condescension and it's dehumanizing. And when I think of the prophetic voice of this text, what would it mean to build more agency in women's bodies? And what would it mean to build more authority and more empowerment and to serve the bodies that need to be served rather than to condescend or to know better or to solve for? And I think that the broken hierarchy of the prophecy of this text has a lot to teach us.
Thank you.
Two thoughts. The first is that rebuilding is not a singular act. The people will rebuild. And my second thought is that there was a time when it was thought that the man placed a full human being in the woman's womb. And now it seems to be the reverse, that women are conceiving purely on their own. No man is involved in terms of the religious rite.
Yeah. All right. So this is really interesting. I'm going to focus on what Sam said about, who's in charge here. The rebuilding of the ancient ruins is what it's talking about. And if you go behind the ancient ruins, there was something called creation. There was something good. There was something right. And something happened. And I fear that the third and final thing I want to say today is that both the left and the right theologically participate in, if we could just find out who to blame, we could take care of it. So there's a kind of shame-based, we want justice now. We want to end racism now. There's always this thing we want to do, as though we were the agents. And as much as I want women to be agents of our own reproductive health, being the agent could be part of the problem. It could be, especially when we are so agentive that all we can do is blame each other for what is or isn't happening. And I don't think God sees us that way. I think that God sees us as not pure, but not so broken that our life is supposed to be, you need to be a fixer guy, you need to be a handyman, you need to have your stain remover out all the time. You see how we approach the world? We're always trying to get it better, as though we're going there. And that's the progressivism, make America great again. That's at the heart of these wonderful things that we try to do to ensure each other the best possible life. Maybe we could remember more, because there's a re-word there too, remember, that God never sees us as permanently broken or permanently fixed. We're kind of a little bit of both. We could borrow God's eyes, that God is somehow the fixer, that the creation was the fix, and we've fallen off of that we're going to live with a crack inside us, or we're going to walk with a limp, or not be able to get out of our chair, or have to accept a nearly humiliating grace. Because what did we do to earn it? God has a plan to restore and repair and is using us, but not requiring us to do things. There are no requirements in the curriculum that God has for the earth or for us. It's all elected. And the second you fill up with the grace and acceptance and get rid of the stigma and all that shame that's everywhere, from the right and from the left, you find yourself capacitated to do things that are good for you and for others. That, I think, is the motion, not fixing it. We try too hard to force justice. We don't try hard enough to live with grace. Were we to work less hard, the streets might even be more dwellable as well. 2 or 3 more? Valerie, then John, and then TJ.
Thank you. So I was going to follow up a little on Donna's words. What's stuck with me is the raise up the age-old foundations of love and age-old foundations of knowing where your strength comes from. The other day I listened to John Lewis talk about the 50s and the 60s and the hosing and the dogs and the jails and the spitting. And he said, but you know, I never hated anyone because it's about love. And with the help of the grace of something higher than you, of knowing that my existence, or his existence was, God got him through that process to understand it wasn't on your own will. And so when I look at this testimony, It takes me to, will raise up the age-old foundations, that grace is the point, love is what's about, and my existence is to, whatever I'm dealing with, is to know that God will help me get through it, and my responsibility is to know that my help comes from the Lord, which allows me, even in things that are not going for me, even in my imperfection, yet perfectly imperfect, that I still can have joy. That's the foundation that's raised up the age-old, in my opinion.
So sorry, Donna, to hear about your mom. I just want to say what is the elephant in the room for me right now, which is the fact that we're doing this. We are actually doing this, and this is the first time I ever helped co-create a sermon with others in a church. Never happened before. So I think we are repairing here. I think this is part of the repairing process. You know, Trump is building walls. We are repairing them right here, right now. There's a line from my teaching practice as a progressive educator. I like to use the phrase architecture of democracy to denote a circle. When you're teaching in a circle, it's the architecture of democracy. And there's a spiritual side to that we're learning right now because we're doing this in a church. I always heard that back in 1965, Judson Church had naked people dancing for the first time. And I always wished I was old enough to be here for that. I wasn't here for that, but I am here for this. And this is really radical. I don't know if anyone else, does this happen? This doesn't. We live in Hoboken, and this has never happened in a church in Hoboken. So, you know, who else wants to talk? Yeah, all right. Okay.
Thanks. Yeah, I'd just thank you so much for noting that, assuming most people in this room are progressive, that we as progressives are also complicit in, I think, reifying oppressive structures, even when we seek to transform and move towards equity. And I just, my experience working as an educator, a white educator working in marginalized communities, and also for the past decade supporting other educators from many different backgrounds, seeking to work and transform with communities to transform. I think like this notion of repairing set against restoring often brings about a form of benevolent paternalism that, you know, we as, I think it's something that particularly I've seen white educators struggle with internalized racial superiority, even with the best of intentions of thinking that their way of doing things is right, and seeing things as broken that may not actually be broken. I think when I've seen people be able to make that shift to restorative practices with communities, particularly when they're outsiders and seeing the beauty of what is created and what's there, the restoring of the ancient that was once there, I think we can get a lot further and actually get towards equity.
When I think about what everyone has said and the notion of repair and restoration, I think about the teaching of the Vedas, which I think was very in line with Christ's teachings, and the notion that there's only one thing happening at all times, and that's evolution, and that there are three things happening in service of evolution at all times, which is creation, maintenance, and destruction, all vital forces that are occurring in nature. And this notion of repair obviously is the maintenance function. But the reason that destruction is happening is because irrelevant things need to be destroyed so that new things can be created in their place. And a lot of what I've heard and I think about is this idea of going out and trying to fix everything in the world that we see as broken, rather than fixing ourselves. And I think that the right to repair really starts with reparation and restoration of ourselves, our broken ways of thinking, our misidentifications with our thoughts, with our small bodies, with our small egos, aligning ourselves with nature and with that flow of evolution and those three forces. And I think that that is vital to create discernment, to know where we need to act to repair things, where they're still relevant and need to be repaired, and where we don't need to act because we need to allow destruction to happen in certain cases.
Instead of the end, I think I should be the beginning, but here we go. So the idea of, well, the foundations, which foundations, who's right, who's got the right answer? And I wanted to tell a story of what happened to me this week to help us realize that we have to stop and figure out what is really going on. So Asa, who is 9, and Isaac, who is 5, and me, who is in her 70s, were waiting for the B-35 bus to go to their house in Brooklyn, and the bus was coming, and just then Asa looked at me and said, I have to pee, I have to pee, I have to pee right now. I thought, okay, Asa, you choose. You choose. Should you pee right now and we'll miss the bus, or should we take the bus and then you pee? He said, pee right now. So he went and peed, and the bus came and left, at which point Isaac started to cry. I wanted to get on that bus. I wanted to get on that bus. Asa made us miss the bus. And I don't know what to do. So we waited a little while, too late for that bus. Another bus came. Asa climbed on. Isaac said, I'm not getting on the bus. I'm not getting on the bus. And in fact, he was holding onto the pole, and I had to pull him out of the bus, and Asa was trying to pull him out of the bus. Other people were trying to get on it. It was a mess. Got him on the bus. And I thought, why? What is wrong with this little 4-year-old? Why doesn't he want to get on the bus? That he was crying, that he missed the bus. So I thought, wait a minute, let's try to figure out what's going on in his head. And this has to do with getting to the foundation. What is the foundation? So I said, Isaac, is the problem that Asa made you miss a bus, so you wanted to miss a bus and get back at Asa? And he said, yes.
That is a foundation. Amen, and thank you. Let's just have a moment of quiet.
Oh Do
Thank you, guys.